Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Haunt. If you're new here, please subscribe and like the video to support the channel. You can also support us by sending a super thanks on this video. Your support truly helps the channel grow. Now, relax and enjoy the story.
Story number 1. The highway had a way of swallowing sound on nights like this. Out past the last town, where the farmhouses thinned and the billboards gave up their arguments, the world narrowed to the twin beams of Earl Haskins' headlights and the steady ribbon of faded centerline pulling him onward. Fog had rolled in early, thick and low, curling across the asphalt like something alive. It muted the colors of the dashboard lights, smeared the red glow of the gauges into halos, and sucked the distance right out of the road. The big diesel's rumble became a muffled heartbeat, wrapped in cotton. Inside the cab, everything felt close and dimly golden. Earl's thermos rattled against the center console every time the rig hit a seam in the pavement. The weak hum of the heater pushed a faint smell of warm dust into the air, mixing with coffee and the ghost of old fast food. A pair of worn gloves lay on the passenger seat like a sleeping animal, and above them, dangling from the visor, a little plastic angel swung gently with each turn of the wheel. He shouldn't have been this tired. He'd slept his 12, eaten a hot meal at the last truck stop, logged everything clean. But there was something about fog that climbed up into a man's thoughts, made every mile feel like 3. It erased the horizon and turned the road into an endless hallway with no visible door at the end. The radio had given up first. Country music dissolved into hiss and faraway whistles until the station faded completely, leaving only thin, restless static. Earl had flipped through the dial out of habit, finding nothing but fragments, half a talk show sentence, a bar of tinny piano, a weather update from a town he didn't recognize, then nothing at all. Just the hush. He tried the CB. Channel 19 crackled faintly, like someone breathing too close to the microphone, but no voices came through. No chatter about speed traps, no jokes, no warnings about deer on the shoulder. It was as if every other truck on that usually busy stretch of state highway had pulled off and left him to it. He checked his mirrors again. They showed him only his own reflection, pale and blurred in the glass, framed by the fog. No headlights behind, none ahead. No red taillights, no roadside reflectors beyond the immediate reach of his beams. The world ended 10 feet past his bumper. Earl leaned forward, knuckles loose on the wheel, scanning for mile markers. He hadn't seen one in too long. The GPS on the dash flickered between his arrow and a blank gray void, spinning, recalculating, then conceding defeat with a vague, proceed to the highlighted route, though the highlighted route was the very strip of pavement he was already following. He tried to work the edge off his nerves. Fog did strange things with distance and time. He knew that. He'd been out here long enough to remember worse nights, old storms, whiteouts where the sky and ground fused into one. He told himself this was just another weather quirk. Keep it between the lines, keep the speed reasonable, keep the coffee hot. Morning always came. The sign appeared out of nowhere, its green face emerging from the mist like a ship's sail. Exit 17, Harwich, services 1 mile. Earl blinked. He knew this stretch, or he thought he did. According to his mental map, there shouldn't have been an exit for at least another 30 miles. Out here it was farmland and low marsh, nothing but long, straight monotony until you hit the interstate connector. The engine hummed on, unconcerned. The sign slipped by in his peripheral vision and vanished back into the fog behind him. Maybe he'd misjudged his position. It happened. You got tired, you lost track. An exit wasn't something to argue with. His fuel gauge hovered a little shy of a quarter tank. Not worrisome yet, but not comfortable either. Road construction, detours, long waits at night. Those could all drink gas faster than a man planned. A second sign glided out of the gray, smaller this time. Services, truck stop, 1/2 mile, open 24 hours. The arrow pointed down an unseen off-ramp. Earl tasted stale coffee on his tongue, and the idea of fresh hot brew tightened his fingers on the wheel. A chance to stretch his legs, get his bearings, maybe double-check his route with someone behind a counter. Fog settled around the trailer like wet wool. A few minutes off the main line wouldn't hurt. He flicked on his blinker. The click-click echoed louder than it should have in the small cab. The white lines of the exit lane loomed up, and he eased the rig over, tires thumping gently across the rumble strip. The off-ramp curved away into thicker fog, climbing slightly. Sodium vapor lights stood along the curve like ghostly sentries, their orange halos diffusing in the mist until the whole world was washed in a dim apricot glow. The railings on either side gleamed with droplets, and beyond them, there was only pale nothing. At the top of the ramp, the world opened just enough to show him a parking lot. It was bigger than he expected, laid out in that old-fashioned way from decades before. Wide diagonal spaces for semis, a cluster of low buildings under a single long awning, neon signs humming lazily in the wet air. A tall, weather-beaten sign rose above it all. Harridge Plaza, fuel, diner, showers, open. The neon tubes inside the letters flickered softly, some strokes dimmer than others. It looked familiar in a way that made something low in Earl's memory stir and twist. The name Harridge tugged a thread. He'd heard it before, maybe back when he'd first started, riding shotgun with an older driver, fresh and green, back when paper logs were still acceptable and truck stops had pay phones instead of Wi-Fi. He pulled into one of the long spaces, brakes sighing as the rig settled. The fog thinned a little under the canopy lights, beating on his windshield in tiny, perfect spheres. For the first time in a while, there were other vehicles around. An old cab-over Freightliner with faded blue paint, a long-nosed rig with a retro logo on the trailer, a couple of pickups that looked like they belonged to another era entirely. They all sat quiet and unmoving, outlined in pearly condensation. Earl shut off the engine. Silence washed in, startling in its complete, muffled weight. The tick-tick of cooling metal crept up from under the hood. Somewhere, a refrigeration unit hummed in a slow, steady rhythm. He pulled on his jacket, felt the worn softness of the lining, and climbed down into the damp night. The air smelled of diesel, wet asphalt, and a faint sweetness, maybe pie from the diner, or maybe just his imagination. His boots made shallow splashes in the thin puddles as he walked toward the entrance. The glass doors slid open without a sound. Inside, the light was softer, yellow and even. The floor tiles were that old speckled kind, cream with little colored flecks, their wax surface dulled by time. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, and chrome-legged stools circled a horseshoe counter. A pie case turned slowly under a plexiglass dome, slices of apple and cherry rotating in patient circles. A radio somewhere behind the counter murmured low, an old song with steel guitar drifting around the room. A waitress in a pale blue uniform looked up as he entered. Her name tag said, Marlene, in block letters. Her hair was pinned in a neat twist, and a little gold cross hung at her throat. She smiled the kind of weary, practiced smile that belonged in places like this. "Cold one out there," she said. Her voice was calm and soft, barely above the hum of the refrigerators. "Coffee? Please," Earl said. His own voice sounded rough, as if he hadn't used it in hours. He slid onto a stool. The vinyl creaked gently under his weight. The clock above the door read 2:17. The second hand didn't move. He watched for a while, catching the small details. The laminated menus with peeling corners, the napkin dispenser with a little chrome ding in one corner, the TV mounted in the far corner, showing a weather map with no sound, the blue and green blurs shifting behind closed captions that scrolled too slowly to follow. The windows were fogged, beads of moisture tracing slow tracks down the glass, turning the outside world into a smear of light and shadow. A few other patrons sat scattered around the room. A man in a trucker cap and flannel stared into his soup as if searching for something buried at the bottom. An older woman in a quilted jacket nursed a mug, eyes on nothing in particular. Near the far end of the counter, a lanky driver in a faded jacket watched Earl with quiet curiosity. Marlene set a mug in front of him. The coffee steamed, dark and fragrant. The warmth coming off the ceramic felt almost surprising against his hands, like finding a heater vent in a cold room. "Been a while since we had someone pull off in this fog," she said conversationally. "Road out there gets strange." Earl wrapped both hands around the mug. "Strange how?" She shrugged. A subtle, economical movement. People lose track is all. Miss their turn, miss their exit. Sometimes they circle back around, end up right where they started without knowing it. She wiped an already clean spot on the counter. Fog doesn't like to let go some nights. The words slipped into him like a draft under a closed door. He sipped the coffee. It tasted fine, hot, bitter in the way diner coffee always was, but there was something peculiar about it. He couldn't quite say what. A flatness, maybe, or a sense that the heat never really traveled through him, as if the warmth stopped halfway down. He glanced around again. None of the other customers seemed in any hurry. No one checked a watch. No one thumbed a phone. In fact, he realized he hadn't seen a phone since he stepped inside. No glowing rectangles. No chargers on the wall. Just an old payphone by the restrooms. Its coiled cord hung neatly, receiver resting in its cradle as though waiting patiently for a call that never quite came. From somewhere near the kitchen, a man's voice floated out, chuckling softly about something Earl couldn't catch. A low answer followed, then the clink of plates. The radio slid into another old tune. "You headed far?" the lanky driver at the far end asked. His voice carried surprisingly well in the hush. "Up to Amaridge, then west," Earl said automatically. "Supposed to be clear sailing once I hit the interstate." The man nodded slowly, as if he recognized the route. "Long way yet, in this kind of soup. Fog'll burn off by morning," Earl said. He meant it as reassurance, but it sounded weak even to himself. "Morning," the man echoed. "Yeah, sometimes." The clock above the door still read 2:17. Earl set his mug down, listening to the faint click as it met the saucer. "How late you all open?" Marlene smiled again, but this time there was something else behind it. Not unkindness, not quite pity, but a sort of gentle warning. "We're always open," she said, "but you shouldn't stay too long, not when it's like this." "Like what?" "The fog," she said simply. "Used to be Harwich had more than this plaza. Town by the river, little Main Street, a school. Then there was a bad season, accidents, pile up out on the highway one year when the fog came in thick. After that..." She trailed off, her eyes flickering briefly toward the windows where the moisture traced new, slow paths. "Well, the mapmakers got tired of redrawing things, I guess." Earl frowned. "Harwich is gone?" "Depends who you ask," the lanky driver murmured. "Depends what road you're on." The sense of unreality pressed a little harder around him, like the fog was pushing gently against the walls. Earl set a few bills under his saucer, more than the coffee cost, and cleared his throat. "Need to top off the tank and get moving," he said. "Scheduled to keep." Marlene's gaze met his. For a moment, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft whir of the ceiling fan seemed to fall away. "You remember your exit?" He hesitated. "Interstate 32, junction at mile 204. "Not that one," she said softly. "The one that brought you here." He thought about the green sign rising out of the fog, exit 17, Harwich. Thought about how sure he'd been that there shouldn't be an exit there at all. He nodded slowly, not quite understanding why. "Then you'll be fine," she said. "Just don't miss it on the way back. Folks who miss it." She let the sentence trail away, giving a tiny shake of her head. "Well, drive safe." He stepped down from the stool. As he headed toward the door, a bulletin board caught his eye, a cluttered rectangle of cork near the restrooms, filled with business cards, old flyers, and photographs curled slightly at the edges. Polaroids, mostly, and some faded prints. People standing by their rigs, groups around a booth, a birthday party with a single balloon drifting at the edge of the frame. On the bottom row, in the center, was a photo that stopped him cold. A man sat at the counter, one hand curled around a coffee mug. The angle was from slightly behind, but Earl knew the slope of those shoulders, the worn trucker jacket, the thinning hair at the crown. The little plastic angel on the counter by his elbow sealed it. It was him. In the photo, the clock above the door read 2:17. A ballpoint pen scrawl along the white bottom border said, "Earl, 10/93, in looping letters. For a moment, his vision tunneled. He reached out, almost touching the slick surface of the photo, feeling the cool nearness of it, like glass over a portrait in a museum. He didn't remember this place. Not this diner, not this stop. In '93, he'd been just getting started, running with another company, another route entirely. He would have remembered. Good picture, the lanky driver said from his stool, voice neutral. We like to keep track of who makes it through. Earl turned slowly. I've never been here, he said. Not tonight, the man replied. The door whooshed open at his back, letting in a breath of damp air. The smell of diesel and cold pavement rushed in as if the outside had been waiting, pressing its face against the glass. Earl stepped through. The fog swallowed him at once. He walked back to his truck on legs that felt both heavy and detached. The rigs around him stood in the same silent, patient rows. The Harridge Plaza sign buzzed faintly overhead, its neon humming like tired bees. Inside his cab, the familiar creaks and smells welcomed him. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, the engine still off, the silence almost thick enough to touch. Then he twisted the key. The diesel grumbled back to life, gauges springing up, indicator lights flashing briefly and then settling. As he eased out of the lot, his headlights swept across the diner's windows one last time. The glass reflected only his beams, no silhouettes inside, no movement. For an instant, it looked empty. Then the fog pressed closer, and the building vanished. The off-ramp fell away behind him. He merged back onto the main highway, the white line stretching out before him in rigid, orderly dashes. The GPS blinked a few times, then finally snapped to attention, his arrow reappearing on a clearly labeled route. According to the screen, he had never left it. The CB crackled softly. Yeah, he found it. A faint voice said, fading in and out like a dream caught between waking breaths. Made his exit. That's one more back on the line. Another voice answered, its tone warm with quiet relief. Good. Fog's heavy tonight. Don't want to lose anyone else. Static swelled, then eased. Earl waited for more, but only the hiss remained. He drove on. The clock on his dash read 3:42. He checked it twice. Gradually, almost shyly, the fog began to thin. Patches of clearer air opened up ahead, and the faint suggestion of trees appeared at the edges of his vision. A mile marker flashed by 187, another 188. The numbers made sense again. After a while, another green sign emerged from the soft gray. Exit 17, Riverdale. No services. No mention of Harridge. No plaza. Just a lonely exit ramp curving away toward darkness. Earl's fingers tightened on the wheel, then relaxed. His thermos rattled comfortingly by his side. The dashboard glowed its familiar red and amber. The road unspooled ahead, leading him out of the last veils of mist and into the promise of a clearer dawn. Hours later, at a busy truck stop off the interstate, he reached into his jacket pocket for his wallet. His fingers brushed paper thin, smooth. He pulled it out. A receipt. Harridge Plaza, it read at the top in block letters. Below, coffee $1.25, and a date, smudged beyond reading, the year just barely legible. E10 Jobai Joshisan. The ink bled slightly at the edges, as if it had been wet once, and never fully dried. He stood there a long moment, the clatter and chatter of the crowded modern truck stop a world away from the quiet hush of the diner in the fog. Then he folded the receipt carefully and slipped it back into his wallet, between his license and an old photograph of a much younger man beside his first truck. Out on the highway that night, fog drew its soft curtains again, and somewhere, in a place that didn't always appear on maps, a clock above a diner door settled its unchanging hands at 2:17, waiting for the sound of another rig pulling off the main line. Story number 2. By midnight, the interstate had become a suggestion more than a road, a faint gleam of damp asphalt disappearing into a wall of white. Lena Hart drove with her shoulders loose and her jaw unclenched, the way she'd trained herself. But the fog pressing against the windshield felt like a living thing, breathing slow and steady in front of her. Her truck, an aging but faithful red Kenworth she called Roscoe, murmured along in low gear. The engine's vibration traveled up through the floorboard into her boots, a steady, soothing tremor. The heater whispered, pushing out just enough warmth to keep the glass from fogging over on the inside. The wipers scraped their rhythmic arc, sweeping away beads of moisture that reformed almost instantly. Outside the cab, the world had narrowed to a tunnel of pale gray. The high beams only made it worse, turning the mist into a solid wall. So she kept the low beams on and watched the faint, ghostly reflection of the white lane markers appearing and vanishing beneath her bumper. Beyond those few feet of road, everything dissolved into softness. No trees, no sky, no horizon. Just a blank canvas swallowing sound and shape alike. The CB had gone quiet nearly an hour ago. Where there was usually a low hum of voices, jokes, warnings, the occasional tired argument, there was only soft static now, like distant breathing. Even the usual low roar of passing semis was missing. No lights grew in her mirrors. No red pinpricks marked a tail end up ahead. Lena took a slow sip from her travel mug. The coffee was lukewarm, edged with that faint metallic taste that came from sitting too long in stainless steel. It was enough. The ritual of it comforted her. She listened to the clink of the mug settling back into its holder and the faint creak of the seat as she shifted her weight. She knew this stretch of highway, a long, flat run through low prairie between towns, usually dull and uneventful. Tonight, it felt different. The fog had rolled in out of nowhere, climbing up off the river and spreading across the fields until it swallowed fences and barns and roadside signs. It was thicker now than she'd ever seen it, layered and dense, turning the lights along the distant exit ramps into distant, blurry halos. She'd been watching the mile markers, counting them down to the next familiar truck stop where she planned to fuel up and rest her eyes for 20 minutes. Mile 142, 141, 140. 3 green numbers on thin metal posts, emerging and vanishing in the glow of her headlights. Then she saw 142 again. It surfaced from the fog like a floating thought, the numbers stenciled in reflective white. 142. The same lean, slight bend in the post. The same ragged patch of grass at the base, flattened as if something heavy had once sat there too long. The same tiny chip missing in the corner of the sign, a dark, fingernail-sized notch. Lena frowned. Maybe she'd misread the first one. It happened. Long runs blurred together. She'd been driving since sundown, breaking only for a quick sandwich at a rest area that smelled of rain and overclean bathrooms. She rolled her shoulders again, took a breath, and refocused on the road. The fog made distances slippery. Another few minutes. Another marker came into view. eBay Sishirar. This time there was no mistaking it. The tiny notch at the corner, the battered grass, even a faint smudge near the number 4 where some long-faded graffiti had once started and been scrubbed off. Same sign. The hum of Roscoe's engine felt suddenly louder. The cab, moments ago a snug little world of dashboard glow and familiar sounds, seemed to shrink around her. Lena stared at the sign as it slid past her window and disappeared into the rearview mirror, where it became nothing more than a dim, retreating shape before the fog swallowed it whole. "Okay," she murmured out loud, her voice steady but softer than usual. "Okay, maybe I missed something." She checked the dashboard, speed steady, fuel just below half. Time, 12:13. The GPS little arrow crawled along a straight purple line. No warnings, no rerouting, no sign of confusion. According to the screen, she was exactly where she should be. The radio, tuned low to a classic rock station, cut out for a second into static before returning with the tail end of a song. The brief hiss made the hair on her arms prickle under her flannel. More fog, more road. The white lines flowed like loose stitches under her tires. Somewhere out there, unseen, the fields rolled away into the dark, broken by windbreaks and half-frozen ditches. A shape appeared ahead on the shoulder. A car, hazard lights blinking a dull, muffled orange in the mist. Lena eased off the throttle slightly, eyes scanning. It was an older sedan, pale blue or gray, its paint dulled by age and wetness. The driver's side door stood open. Inside, the cabin light glowed warmly, revealing empty seats. No one stood beside the car. No one waved from the fog. As she rolled past, She saw something in the back seat, just a shape, a leaned-over silhouette, as if someone sat bowed with their head cradled in their hands. Too indistinct to read, gone in an instant as Roscoe's bulk carried her onward. The urge to pull over tugged at her. Truckers looked out for each other, and for anyone else stuck on lonely stretches like this. But stopping a semi on a shoulder in low visibility conditions wasn't simple. You had to be sure. Better to call it in. Let someone closer, someone in a car, someone who could turn around more easily. Check. Her hand hovered over the CB mic. She stared into the milk white ahead and said nothing. 10 minutes. 15. The road remained stubbornly the same, an unspooling strip of dull, damp black, borders soft and uncertain. The loneliness of the night pressed in, not hostile, but thick, indifferent. The kind of absence that made every tiny noise exaggerated. The faint rattle in the overhead compartment, the whisper of her jacket against the seat, the tiny click when her thumbnail brushed the plastic of the steering wheel. A green rectangle emerged again. Ipai Sishirar. She swallowed. The numbers stared back at her, as plain and uncomplicated as ever, as if they weren't quietly rewriting everything she knew about miles and markers and the steady, sane logic of highways. A low tingle moved up the back of her neck, not sharp enough to be fear, but insistent. She flicked on the CB and cleared her throat. Anyone out eastbound on 23 right now? You all catching this fog? Here? Words went into the receiver and seemed to fall into a well. Static answered her, soft and even. No crackle of life, no bored insomniac voice breaking in with a joke or a 10 to 4. The channel felt empty. Not quiet. Busy, just quiet. The radio station drifted away again, the guitar solo dissolving into a clutter of half-sounds. For a second she caught a different voice, tinny and thin, like an AM station from another decade. Visibility is expected to drop near zero in low-lying areas. Motorists are advised. Then that too faded into a flat, grainy hiss. Ahead, a dull orange blink, steady and familiar. The same sedan sat on the shoulder, door open, cabin light burning like a little domestic sun. Same angle, same slouching shadow in the back seat. The hazard lights ticked their metronome rhythm, though Lena could not hear them. She felt them in the way they sliced the darkness into fractions of a moment. She eased Roscoe toward the center of the lane, passing slower this time. The need to understand warred with an animal caution that told her not to linger. Her eyes swept over the car as she drew alongside. On the driver's seat, she thought she saw the impression of a body that had just risen. Faint, darker oval on the fabric, touched by damp. On the rear window, a line had been traced through the condensation from the inside, a fingertip dragging a message. She caught only the last curve of a letter before it slid out of sight. Her rearview mirror showed her the car shrinking, the hazard lights fading into tiny, isolated sparks before being swallowed again by the curtain of white. She checked the clock. 12. 13. Still, her heart ticked once, hard enough that she felt it in her throat. She tapped the clock with a fingernail, as if she could jog it back into compliance. The red digits held their place, unwavering. The road continued. Mile marker 142 waited for her like a patient, recurring thought. She drove past it again. This time, something in her recognized the pattern not just as coincidence or fatigue, but as something with its own strange looping rhythm. The same distance between sign and sedan, the same slow count in her head, the same brief flutter of her truck's suspension as she crossed a particular, almost imperceptible ripple in the pavement. Somewhere out in the white ocean beyond her beams, a horn sounded, low and far, not quite a foghorn, not quite another truck, just a deep, mournful note that rose and fell and then was gone. Lena let her breath out slowly. "All right," she said, quiet and firm, as if addressing the fog itself. "We're not doing this forever." She checked her mirrors, more out of habit than necessity. Nothing behind, nothing ahead. The world was hers alone in that moment. A private corridor of mist and glowing paint. When the next faint orange blink appeared, she made her decision. Instead of rolling past, she signaled and eased Roscoe onto the shoulder, careful and slow. The gravel crunched softly under her tires, the vibration changing tone as the truck came to a gentle stop some yards behind the sedan. She switched on her hazard lights. Their steady clicking filled the cab. For a moment she just sat there, listening to the engine idle, feeling the heat from the vents brush her hands. The fog pressed against the side windows, turning the outside cabin lights into weak, formless glows. She didn't turn the engine off. She didn't want silence. The sedan's shape was a darker smudge in the white ahead, its own blinking lights beating time with hers. Every flash lit the fog from the inside, revealing swirling eddies and soft, slow curls, as though the mist was breathing in response. Lena reached for the flashlight clip near her seat and stepped down carefully onto the shoulder. The air bit cool against her cheeks, tasting faintly metallic and damp, like the inside of a walk-in freezer. The smell of wet earth and distant water threaded through the sharper scent of hot diesel. Roscoe's hazard lights painted alternating bands of amber across her boots as she walked forward. Her footsteps sounded strangely muffled, as if the fog ate the sound before it could fully form. "Hey there," she called out, voice calm but pitched to Carrie. "You all right? Need a hand?" The white swallowed her words. They came back to her as the faintest echo, distorted as though someone else had said them several yards away, following slightly behind. She approached the open door. The cabin light inside was neither warm nor cold, more a paper-thin glow, as if emanating from an old lampshade. The driver's seat was empty. No footprints in the thin film of moisture on the pavement. No dropped keys. No sign of a hurried departure. In the back seat, the shape she had seen resolved into a worn gray coat folded over itself, hood drooping like a bowed head. On the fogged rear window, words had indeed been written from the inside, lines traced with a hesitant finger. "Don't miss it," they said. The letters were already softening, moisture bleeding their edges, turning them into ghostly, illegible curves. Lena's skin prickled. "Miss what?" she murmured, more to herself than anyone. The horn, or whatever it was, sounded again, faint but closer. A low, patient sound that might have come from nowhere in particular, or everywhere. She backed away from the sedan, slow and steady, her flashlight beam cutting only a short cone in the thick air. Roscoe loomed up in front of her, all angles and familiar lines, his cab lights small islands in the fog. She climbed back in, closed the door with a careful thunk, and rested her hands on the wheel without starting to move. "Don't miss it," she repeated under her breath. The phrase seemed to hang in the cab, joining the scent of coffee and the hum of the idling engine. She thought about the loop, the unchanging time, the relentless reappearance of the same mile marker. Out beyond the limited reach of her headlights, the highway sprawled in its straight line toward the next town, the next exit, the next known thing. But if she kept pushing straight ahead, the night seemed determined to fold over itself and present her with the same mile of road again and again. "Don't miss it." Her gaze slid to the shoulder on the opposite side of the highway, where the fog lay unbroken and featureless, a blank sheet waiting for the first stroke of ink. She took a breath. Then she did something she rarely, almost never did. She turned on her left blinker, checked for traffic she knew would not be there, and carefully crossed the empty lanes. Easing Roscoe onto the far shoulder, pointed back the way she had come. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. The fog pressed in, the hazard lights clicked, the engine hummed. Then, very softly, the static on the CB shifted. "Westbound. Watch your speed near 142. Fog's like soup out here tonight," a voice said, clear as day, bored and familiar. Another voice cut in. 10-4. Appreciate it. Anyone else running this stretch? I could use some company in the dark. Lena stared through the windshield. The white ahead seemed lighter, somehow. Not thinner, not yet, but less absolute. As if the fog had lost some small advantage. She eased back onto the road, now westbound, following the dim suggestion of the lines. The GPS blinked, protested, then corrected the arrow to match her new direction. After a few minutes, a green sign rose out of the mist. Ibai Sushisan. Her laugh surprised her. It came out low and shaky, but it was real. The tension in her shoulders loosened one small notch. A voice on the CB, someone she didn't recognize, but who sounded solid and alive and ordinary, chatted about the weather up ahead, about a diner at the next exit, about lukewarm coffee and overcooked eggs. She listened as if to music. Back in her mirror, the fog thickened and folded, hiding the stretch of highway she'd just escaped. Somewhere inside that folding whiteness, mile 142 waited with its patient milepost and its abandoned sedan and its finger-traced warning on glass. "Don't miss it," she murmured again. Not as fear now, but as a quiet promise she'd kept. Miles later, when the fog finally began to break for good, tearing into ragged patches that revealed stars and the faint outline of distant treetops, Lena glanced at the clock. The minutes had finally moved on. She drove toward the next rest stop, where bright lights and the distant murmur of other travelers would restore the familiar scale of things. Yet, every now and then, through a thin veil of lingering mist, she thought she could see a solitary green sign standing alone in a field, numbers unreadable at this distance, keeping its watch over a piece of road that did not always play by ordinary rules. Story number 3. The detour sign had looked temporary in the daylight, like something tossed up for a weekend construction project and forgotten. By the time Malik hit it, night had pushed in and the fog had settled low, turning the orange reflective arrows into hazy little moons floating in a wall of gray. He downshifted the Freightliner, the big engine humming into a quieter range, and followed the detour arrow off the interstate onto a 2-lane state highway he'd never taken before. The GPS sulked for a moment, then redrew his path in a thin, uncertain line through a blank expanse of green. The main route west was closed after a rock slide. Every sign he'd passed for the last 50 miles had promised a temporary alternate route. Nobody had mentioned the fog. Out here, away from the sodium-bright rest areas and constant glow of other vehicles, the darkness felt older. The mist turned Malik's headlights into soft cones, barely reaching beyond the front of the hood before dissolving. Pines lined the road on both sides, tall and close, their upper branches lost in the low cloud. The white center line slid under his wheels like a strip of tape unspooling into nothing. Inside the cab, the world was warm and dim, painted in red and blue from the dashboard lights. Malik's thermos sat in the cup holder, half full of coffee that had gone from hot to merely tepid. A faint rattle came from somewhere in the sleeper berth where a hanger swung with each gentle sway. The hum of the tires on the imperfect asphalt was softer than interstate sound, more intimate, like a whisper instead of a roar. The CB had been quiet since he left the main line. No more jokes from westbound drivers, no weather updates, no complaints about dispatch, just a flat background hiss. The regular radio, tuned to a classic R&B station out of the city, faded in and out, horns and vocals chopping into static whenever the road dipped into a hollow. Malik checked his mirrors again. The trailer glowed faintly, reflective tape smeared by moisture. No headlights behind him, no oncoming beams. The road might have been built for him alone, laid out just for this one night. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 1:09 a.m. The GPS agreed. If the detour didn't delay him too much, he'd still be on time to hit the distribution center at dawn. He thought about the coffee in their break room, somehow always both too strong and too weak at once. He thought about the silence waiting for him at whatever motel he'd grab on the back end. The thoughts were small, practical, a deliberate backdrop against the press of the fog. The music on the radio warbled, the bass line warping as if it were being played underwater. Then it cut out entirely. Static filled the cab, not loud but total. Malik reached for the knob, intending to scan for another station, but his fingers froze when a voice slid in under the noise. "Northbound detour traffic. This is a safety advisory," it said. The tone was calm, oddly formal, like an old public service announcement. "If you are hearing this, reduce your speed." Malik's hand hovered over the dial. He hadn't touched the channel selector. The screen still showed the frequency of the station he'd been listening to. He glanced at the speedometer, then eased off the throttle another 5 miles an hour. The engine note dropped into a slightly deeper murmur. "In approximately 1 mile, the voice continued, you will encounter reduced visibility and a narrow bridge. Stay centered in your lane. Do not attempt to pass. Do not stop on the bridge." A tiny chill traced the line of Malik's spine, slow and precise. It was the word You. Not drivers, not motorists, just you, spoken matter of fact, as if the announcer had leaned directly into his cab. He looked at the GPS again. No bridge symbol appeared on the map, just a green line threading through contour marks that hinted at hills and valleys. Out the windshield, the fog thickened incrementally, a shade denser than before. Repeat, the voice said, as though following some script. Northbound detour traffic. This is a safety advisory. Reduce your speed. Do not stop on the bridge. The timbre of it reminded him of old recordings he'd heard as a kid, watching late-night TV, civil defense tapes, emergency broadcast tests with their neutral, steady cadence. But there was no digital tone, no familiar beep, no call letters. He pressed the scan button anyway. The display flicked through empty frequencies, static, a burst of distant music, a fragment of someone laughing far away, then landed back on the same station. The same voice came through, now listing weather conditions for counties he'd never heard of, in a rhythm that didn't quite match current forecasts. Ahead, something darker grew within the gray. Malik squinted. The road dipped slightly, then rose into a faint, arched shape. Guardrails emerged on both sides, their metal slick with moisture. A small, retro-reflective sign materialized at the shoulder. Single-lane bridge, 25 miles per hour. The paint was faded. The sign itself looked older than the others along the detour, as if it had been there long before the temporary orange arrows. He slowed to a crawl. The fog over the ravine felt different, thicker and somehow heavier, like a physical weight pressing down. The bridge's side rails formed a narrow hallway ahead, vanishing into blankness. The radio crackled softly. Maintain speed. Do not stop on the bridge, the voice repeated. The calmness had taken on the smallest edge now. Not urgency exactly, but insistence. Malik eased Roscoe onto the boards. The change under his wheels was subtle but there. A hollow timbre, a faint echo under the steady rumble. The fog pressed closer, beating on the mirrors, smearing the world outside into formless light and shadow. Halfway across, visibility shrank to a few truck lengths. The guardrails faded. For a moment there was nothing but the hum of the engine and the shallow, slow drum of his own heartbeat. Then, faintly, like a layer laid over his present, he heard something else. Tires skidding in panic, a horn blaring too long, shouts strangled by distance and time. It didn't come from ahead or behind, not exactly. It felt like sound preserved in the wood and metal under his tires, replaying for anyone willing to listen closely enough. Malik kept his hand steady on the wheel. The voice on the radio dropped to a near whisper, as if respectful. Maintain lane, do not stop. Almost across now. He did not remember anyone saying that last part in the safety advisories he'd grown up hearing. A shape loomed briefly to his left. Just beyond the rail, a dark mass below, where the ravine must be. For a heartbeat, it suggested twisted steel, a trailer on its side, lights long dead. Then the fog folded over it like a sheet. On the far side, the bridge ended as suddenly as it had begun. The tires found solid asphalt again, the hollow echo replaced by a drier, more familiar grip. Malik exhaled, realizing he'd been holding part of his breath. As if on cue, the radio station snapped back to life. The transition was almost seamless. A saxophone gliding through a solo, the DJ chuckling about the late hour, the soft, fuzzy warmth of normal programming. The clock on the dash ticked over to 1:16. He drove on. The fog stayed, but it changed texture, breaking now and then into thinner veils that showed a glimpse of treetops, a hint of stars veiled in high cloud. A mile marker slid by. 63. The GPS straightened its uncertain line, resolving into a cleaner path that promised a junction with another highway ahead. A few miles later, the glow of taillights appeared in the distance, the first vehicle he'd seen in some time. Another semi, older, with a boxy trailer and a logo he didn't recognize, white script on faded blue. Malik's headlights caught the lettering for a moment. Northern Line Haulers. The paint looked worn, almost sun, bleached, as if from another decade. He clicked his CB. Northbound on 71. You catch that advisory back there? He asked, half expecting silence. For a second he heard only static. Then a voice answered, thin but clear, carrying a faint echo, like an old recording. "Always do on nights like this," it said. "Keep it steady, driver." Fogg remembers. Before Malik could reply, the other truck's taillights blurred, then dimmed, then seemed to fold into the mist ahead, as if they'd rounded a curve that wasn't on the map. When he reached the spot, there was only straight, empty road. The detour eventually spilled him back onto the main interstate in the pale hours before dawn. Traffic resumed its usual distant rush. The sky lightened to the color of old paper, and the fog thinned into scattered wisps chasing the ditches. At a fuel stop, under bright white canopy lights, the world looked ordinary again. Diesel pumps, vending machines, tired cashiers. While his tank filled with a sturdy, comforting hum, Malik wandered inside and glanced at the local bulletin board out of habit. Among the flyers for lawn services and lost pets, a black and white newspaper clipping was pinned crookedly. "Local driver honored," the headline read. Beneath it, in grainy ink, was a photograph of a ribbon cutting at a new bridge 30 years ago. A younger version of the same span he'd just crossed, fog curling at the edges of the frame. The article mentioned a tragic pileup on the old structure. Dense fog, multiple vehicles going over the side. In response, the county had rebuilt and installed a permanent low-band advisory broadcast for detour traffic on certain nights. Malik read the line twice. There was no frequency listed, no technical explanation, just a closing quote from an official. "If it keeps folks from stopping on that bridge again, we don't ask too many questions." Back in his cab, when he turned the key, the radio came up exactly where he'd left it, playing a song that hadn't been written 30 years ago. The dial glowed its ordinary modern green. He pulled back onto the highway. The rising sun was only a pale hint behind the thinning clouds, but the road ahead was clear. In his mirrors, the low hills and distant line of trees retreated slowly, wrapped now not in fog, but in that softer kind of morning haze that promised an ordinary day. Story number 4. Fog gathered on the mountain like a slow, deliberate breath. It wasn't the thin kind that skimmed the tops of trees and moved on. This was the heavy, patient kind that filled valleys and wrapped itself around the road, turning headlights into short, glowing tunnels. Devin rolled his Peterbilt along the grade, eyes steady, hands loose on the wheel. The engine murmured in low gear, holding him back as the two-lane highway threaded its way along a ridge somewhere between counties with names he never remembered. Out here, the map shrank down to this single ribbon of asphalt, the guardrail a pale suggestion at the edge of sight, then nothing at all. Inside the cab, it was warm and dim. The dash glowed gentle greens and reds, instruments as familiar as the lines on his own palms. A thermos of coffee sat wedged in its holder, half empty and cooling. Above the windshield, his small collection of trinkets, an old brass key, a plastic bobblehead, a tiny dream catcher swayed faintly with each curve, the movement subtle and hypnotic. He checked the clock. 2:38 a.m. The GPS screen showed their position as a tiny arrow hugging a white line that crossed a patch of green labeled simply National Forest. No small town names, no gas station icons, just the suggestion of trees and contour lines. The little text at the top read, US 19 newtons, no data. The CB had been quiet for miles. Every now and then it coughed a scrap of static, a half-word that might have been someone else's late-night fatigue, then settled again. No one joked about the grades. No one warned about deer. Devin felt the solitude like a tangible thing, not unfriendly, but thick. He had just eased around a slow, sweeping bend when the first sign appeared out of the fog. Stateway Station, 1 mile. All trucks must stop. The reflective letters leapt out of the white, hung for a heartbeat in his beams, then slid by. Devin frowned. There shouldn't have been a scale house up here. He knew the region well enough. This stretch was more about getting over the mountain than about revenue. Still, it wasn't unheard of. Rural states liked surprise inspections. Maybe it was new. The road dipped, then rose again. Pines crowded the shoulder, their trunks vanishing into swirling mist. The hum of the tires took on a slightly different tone as the surface changed older pavement, maybe rougher aggregate. Another sign. Way station, half-mile. Prepare to stop. He glanced at the fuel gauge, just under a quarter tank, enough to get him off the mountain and into the next cluster of lights. Logbook was clean. Weight was legal. There was no practical reason to resent a stop. But the idea of breaking this cocoon of motion, of stepping out into that damp, cool thickness, he rolled his shoulders once, relieving the tightness. Up ahead, a glow bled into the fog, soft and sodium yellow. A pair of tall lamps illuminated a break in the tree line and the faint hint of a turnoff. As he drew closer, the structure took shape. A low, flat-roofed building with big windows facing the lane, a single bay with an overhead door, a pole with a green open sign glowing steady above the pavement. The scales themselves were dark gray slabs laid lengthwise in the road, barely visible until he was nearly on top of them. A small louvered speaker stood on a post like a quiet sentinel. Devon sighed once through his nose, signaled, and rolled into the way lane. The truck's vibrations changed tone as he eased up onto the metal plates. The fog thinned slightly under the high lamps, turning the air into a pale, humming yellow. He stopped where the painted line told him to. The dashboard settled into its soft ticking as the temperatures adjusted. In his mirrors, the main road was nothing but a faint suggestion beyond the fog, empty and still. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a soft buzz, the green sign above him flickered, held, and stayed on. A red digital display mounted near the window blinked to life, numbers scrolling axle weights, gross, totals. Everything read within limits, neat and unremarkable. A speaker crackled dry and thin. "Bring it on up to the window, driver," a voice said, as calm and ordinary as if it had been doing this all night. "Need to see your paperwork." Devon nudged the truck forward until his cab lined up with the front of the low building. Fluorescent light washed out from inside, pale and humming. Through the glass, he could see counters, a corkboard, shelves with binders. A figure sat behind the counter near the window, head bowed over a clipboard. He set the parking brake with a soft hiss, grabbed his clipboard and folder, and opened the door. Cool air brushed his face at once, carrying the smell of damp concrete, wet pine, and something old underneath like paper that had absorbed years of humidity. The fog swirled around his boots as he took the metal steps down. Under the lamps, his breath showed faint and white. The building's windows glowed, but the world beyond their little circle of light was consumed by soft gray. He stepped inside. The door's closer side shut behind him. The interior smelled of coffee and dust and faint disinfectant. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, their light flattening colors. A wall calendar showed a picture of a lake in summer, all blue water and green trees. The month was October. The year printed in small numbers underneath was 3 years past. The man behind the counter looked up as Devon approached. He was in his late 50s, maybe, with thinning gray hair and a state-issue shirt buttoned up to the collar. His eyes were pale, the kind that might be blue or gray depending on the light. A styrofoam cup, half full of something the color of weak tea, sat near his elbow. "Evenin'," the man said. His voice had a slow mountain cadence, unhurried. "Running light tonight." "Yeah," Devon answered, sliding his paperwork over. "Just pallets and packing. Nothing exciting." The man smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth barely moving. "Excitement's overrated in our line of work." He leafed through the pages with methodical care, scanning, flipping, initialing in the margins with a pen that clicked softly between his fingers. Devon glanced past him, taking in details. A coffee maker on a back table, its hot plate ringed with old stains. A binder labeled Inspection Protocol, Rev 4, leaning at an angle. On the corkboard, a few notices. Holiday schedules, a photocopied safety slogan. One sheet caught his eye. A grainy photograph of a jackknife truck on a snowy grade. Lights of emergency vehicles hazy in the image. The caption read, "Remember December 5, TH. Slow it down for fog and ice." Something about the truck in the picture, the style of the cab, the older logo on the trailer made him think of 10, 15 years ago. "You up from Oak Ridge?" the man asked without looking up. Devon blinked. "Yeah, dropped there earlier." "Figured," the man said. "Most folks on this route tonight are. You watch yourself on the north side, past mile 58. fog likes to sit in that bowl. Folks get careless. The pause before that last word was slight, but there. How bad does it get? Devon asked, more to fill the quiet than anything. The man's pen paused for a heartbeat over the form. Bad enough 3 winters in a row, he said lightly. We built this place after the second one. Thought a reminder might help. Sometimes it does. He stamped the last page with a dull thump and slid the stack back across the counter. You're good. Keep it under 40 till you're past the river bridge. Don't let the grade talk you into faster. Devon nodded, folding the paperwork under his arm. Appreciate it. The man's gaze met his, clear and steady. For a moment, the hum of the lights and the faint tick of a wall clock seemed to fade. Road's quiet tonight, he said. You'll hear more than you see. Don't pay attention to what's behind you in the fog, just what's in front. It was an odd piece of advice, given in an utterly reasonable tone. Devon almost asked what he meant. Instead, he said, "You've been up here long." The man's smile reached his eyes this time, though just barely. Long enough. Someone's got to be here when the fog comes in. He nodded toward the door. Best you get moving, driver. Night doesn't like to sit still. Outside, the lamps painted the mist into swirling golden layers. Devon climbed back into his cab, the interior warmth wrapping around him like a blanket. He set the paperwork on the passenger seat, released the brake, and eased forward. In his side mirror, he caught one last glimpse of the Waymaster in the window. A small, still figure framed in pale light, watching him go. The main highway reclaimed him a few hundred yards later. The scales faded behind a curtain of fog and darkness. The grade on the north side did exactly as promised. It curled down into a broad valley where the fog pooled thicker, a soft, luminous gray that ate his beams and returned them in short, glowing scraps. Devon held his speed at 35, eyes fixed on the center line. Once, in the mirror, he thought he saw the faint suggestion of headlights following a twin glow, perfectly matched to his own rhythm. He remembered the man's words and kept his eyes forward. 20 minutes later, as the road began to climb out of the valley and the fog thinned to wisps, the CB crackled to life. Northbound on 19, you roll through that old scale house? A voice asked, amused and rough around the edges. Devon thumbed the mic. Yeah, they're open tonight. A pause. Then laughter. Not unkind, just disbelieving. Buddy, that place has been shut 10 years. Roof caved in 2 summers back. You sure you aren't running too long without sleep? Devon slowed a fraction. Green sign was lit. Guy inside checked my logs. Told me to keep it under 40 through the bowl. Silence stretched for a few seconds. Just the soft hiss of the channel. When the voice came back, it was flatter. They did lose an inspector there, the other driver said. Fog wreck, like he told you. Folks say he still clocks anyone who'll listen. Helps him down the hill. Me, I don't make a habit of stopping if the signs are on. Means the fog's bad enough he's working. Devon's hands tightened lightly on the wheel. He glanced at the paperwork on the passenger seat. The top page was stamped. All right, but the ink from the rubber stamp had bled. The edges blurry as if water had once touched it. 10-4, he said quietly. I'll keep that in mind. At the next truck stop, under bright LED canopy lights that made the world small and sharp again, he asked the cashier about the scale on the ridge. She shrugged, sliding his receipt toward him. That old thing? My granddad worked there. Closed before I was out of high school. Some nights folks swear they see the lights on in the fog, though. She smiled, but it didn't quite dismiss the thought. If someone told you to slow down on that grade, you listen. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Later, back on the highway, Devon watched the mountains recede in his mirrors, their dark shapes softened by leftover mist. Somewhere up there, he knew, sat a low building with big windows and humming fluorescent lights, or the memory of one waiting for the next rig to roll onto its silent scales when the fog grew thick and the clock slid past 2 in the morning. Story number 5. The fog on Highway 61 didn't roll in so much as rise up, as if the fields themselves were exhaling. One moment the road ran clear between harvested corn stubble and dark, sleeping farmhouses. The next, the first tendrils curled over the blacktop, pale and slow, knitting themselves into something thick and close. Renee flipped her wipers up a notch and watched them carve brief, clean arcs in the damp. The Kenworth's cab wrapped around her in a dim cocoon of instrument light, gentle greens and ambers, a soft red glow from the heater controls. The reefer unit's steady thrum came through faint from behind her, like a second, deeper heartbeat keeping time with the engine. She'd been on this stretch of two-lane for an hour now, cutting diagonally between interstates to make up time lost to earlier construction. It wasn't her usual route. Dispatch had talked about Old 61 like it was a harmless back road, the kind of thing locals used to shave a few miles. In fair weather, maybe it was. With the fog thickening into a solid curtain, it felt older than that, like a road that remembered more than she did. The CB had gone quiet 20 minutes back, the last of the chatter dropping off when she turned away from the main east-west flow. The regular FM radio stations had fallen one by one into static. Now, the only sounds were the engine's low hum, the faint squeak of the right-side vent when the cab flexed, the soft sigh of her own breath. She checked the clock on the dash. 1:52 a.m. The numbers glowed with a sleepy certainty. Her coffee was down to its last inch at the bottom of the travel mug. Lukewarm and a little bitter, but she took a sip anyway, more for the ritual than the caffeine. Outside, the world narrowed to what her low beams could manage. 50, maybe 60 feet of damp road, bordered by vague smudges that might be fence posts or bushes. The center line appeared and disappeared in short, bright segments beneath her, a slow, hypnotic stitch. She adjusted her position in the lane, easing slightly left to give the right shoulder a wider berth. The tires hummed smoothly over the worn asphalt. Then, almost imperceptibly, the sound changed. It wasn't the harsh growl of hitting a rumble strip. It was subtler, a rising tremor under the soles of her boots, a new texture in the hum. The vibration threaded up through the steering wheel, not violent, but patterned, like the difference between random rain on a roof and raindrops from a leaking gutter hitting the same place again and again. She frowned, listening. The fog outside pressed against the glass. Soft and absolute. Inside, the new vibration settled into a kind of rhythm, small variations in the pavement repeating themselves under her tires. Da-da-da, pause, da-da, pause, da-da-da-da. It almost sounded melodic. Renee shook her head once, light and dismissive. Long nights and too much monotony could make a person hear patterns in anything. The clack of rail crossings, the distant bark of dogs, the way the engine note shifted on a grade. Still, she eased the wheel a fraction right. Testing. The song changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The vibration under her feet skipped a beat, then found a new pattern. Longer rumble, shorter, pause, longer, short. She realized, slowly, that the grooves must be in the pavement itself, faint cuts or seams that cut across the lane in some regular spacing. She'd ridden musical rumble strips once on a tourist road out west, hit them at 45, and they'd play a jingle you could almost recognize. Maybe some county road crew here had gotten creative. It was a strange place to put such a thing, though. On a lonely, fog-choked road no one seemed to use. She listened harder, willing herself not to overinterpret. Yet as she held the wheel steady, the faint tune rose, hidden in the low murmur of rubber on stone. Two low notes, one high, a short gap, too low again. It brushed at memory in a way that made her chest feel suddenly tight. Not a song from the radio, not anything she could name. More like a fragment of humming from long ago, someone in a driver's seat ahead of her, steady hands, low voice filling the space between white lines. Her father had hummed to himself when he drove. Not loud, not for an audience, just little scraps of melody under his breath on late-night runs. She'd sat behind him once, as a kid, perched on the edge of a jump seat in the days before anyone thought too hard about that. The sound of his humming had blended with the road until she fell asleep against the window. She told herself it was coincidence. Old muscle memory reaching for something comforting in the unfamiliar, highway hypnosis, latching onto the smallest input. The fog thickened. Her headlights dissolved even sooner now. the world beyond them carved down to a narrow, intimate corridor of gray. The road seemed to rise and fall more than before, small unseen dips magnified by how little she could see. Her hands stayed loose on the wheel, knuckles not yet white, but her focus sharpened to a fine point. The CB crackled, not loud, just a dry pop, a whisper of sound. The radio had been on scan, cycling slowly through channels in the background, searching for any sign of life. It settled now, the LED display pausing on 19. For a moment there was nothing. Then, layered under a ghost of static, a voice slipped through. "Southbound on 61, you seeing that fog up ahead?" it asked. The tone was low, familiar in the broad way that all late-night trucker voices were, tired but watchful. The words rode the hiss like they'd been recorded elsewhere, and bled into this frequency by mistake. Renee hesitated, thumb hovering over the mic. She was northbound, not south, but any voice was company. "Copy that," another voice answered. This one was deeper, with that worn, calm older drivers had. "It's thick in the bottoms. Keep it slow past the singing mile." The hairs on the back of her neck stirred. No one called it that on her dispatch notes. Nobody had said a word about singing pavement. She glanced at the clock. 1:52. "Still, always does this time of year," the first voice said. There was an odd warble in the transmission, as if someone had spliced old tape. "You hear it tonight?" A chuckle, quiet and fond. "I always hear it. Folks who don't, they're usually the ones going too fast." The CB hissened out again, the voices thinning into the kind of emptiness that didn't feel like simple loss of signal. Renee waited, thumb resting lightly against the mic button. After a full minute of nothing, she let it fall away. The road hummed beneath her. This time she didn't try to tell herself it was random. The pattern wasn't perfectly regular, the pavement wasn't that precise, but the rises and dips in vibration seemed to gather themselves into something like phrases. Low, short tremor, a smoother stretch, then another cluster. She slowed a little more, bringing her speed down from 50 to 40. The fog responded by feeling even closer, as if it resented giving up any ground. Ahead, the vague suggestion of a sign rose out of the gray. She leaned forward, squinting. "Slow to 35. Fog area," it read. The bottom edge of the metal was speckled with rust. Someone had stuck a faded, reflective decal of a smiling cartoon truck in one corner, years ago. She dropped another 5 miles an hour. The Kenworth's engine note changed, settling into a patient, almost lulling growl. In that space, the road song became clearer. 3 low vibrations in quick succession, a longer pause, then 3 again. ... dash dash dash, ... She heard it before she understood. Her mind supplied the pattern from somewhere far away. SOS. Her throat went dry. The CB crackled once more, softer this time, as if very far off. "Northbound, you listening?" a voice asked. Only one word was clearly audible. The rest blurred at the edges, syllables smudging into the hiss. The call sign that followed was one she hadn't heard spoken aloud in years, not since the funeral, not since they'd told stories at the VFW about fog and bad timing and a curve nobody had bothered to mark. Her father's handle. It couldn't be. Rationally, she knew that. Frequencies overlapped. Old cassettes got digitized and rebroadcast as novelties late at night. Drivers reused call signs all the time. There were a dozen simple explanations, all of them more likely than the one her pulse was trying to sell her. Still, she answered before she could talk herself out of it. "Northbound on 61, she said, voice steady only because she made it so. "I'm here." Static swelled, then thinned, as if something large had just moved past the antenna. When the voice came again, it was blurred, syllables missing. It sounded like someone trying to shout through layers of cotton. "Don't curve," it said. "Next. Bottom. Off." The rest dissolved. She eased even more pressure off the pedal, letting the truck bleed down toward 30. Her headlights struck nothing but a continuous wall of pale gray ahead. The center line wavered as the pavement dipped into some unseen hollow. The road's vibration shifted again. The humming under her feet lengthened into one continuous, low tremor, steady, insistent. It wasn't a tune anymore. It was a held note, a warning tone you felt more than heard. "Okay," she told the empty cab quietly. "Okay, I hear you." The fog thickened until it felt like driving inside a cloud. Moisture beaded and ran on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. On either side, the vague dark shapes of trees or posts vanished altogether. The world became road and fog, and the interior of her cab, floating in nothing. Then, slowly, another shape climbed up out of the blankness. A barricade, reflective stripes smeared by moisture, smack across her lane. She hit the brake, firm but not panicked. The trailer's weight pushed a little, then settled. The reefer unit hummed on, unconcerned. The barricade loomed, then stopped, just 10 feet ahead, centerline vanishing into the legs of its folding frame. "Road closed, high water," the sign bolted to it said. Someone had added new detour with an arrow in black spray paint below, pointing right into the white. Renee's hand stayed on the wheel for a moment longer, feeling the faint residual quiver of the road's last message fade out under her palms. She flipped on her hazards. Their orange blink filled the fog immediately around her with small rhythmic pulses. Close now, she could hear water somewhere beyond the barricade, not roaring, but moving, a low, steady rush. The hollow the road dropped into was flooded. In this visibility, she'd never have seen it until she was in it. A smaller sign stood where the shoulder began, the kind of thing a county crew might have thrown together at dusk. Dieter, County 7, 1, 4 miles, back. The arrow pointed behind her. Slowly, she eased the truck into a careful 3-point turn on the narrow 2-lane, feeling the trailer follow, patient and heavy. The fog watched, expressionless. When she straightened out, heading back the way she'd come, the pavement's hum changed again. The pattern of seams and grooves reversed under her tires. For a few fleeting seconds, they aligned into something almost like the first half of a melody she knew instinctively how to finish. Not words, not quite a tune, just the sense of being guided, lightly, out of a place that might have kept her. She drove until she found the little county road, its signpost leaning, letters half swallowed by lichen. Gravel crunched softly under her tires as she took the turn. The fog followed for a time. Then at some invisible boundary thinned, shredded, and finally let her go. Stars appeared overhead, faint and cold. At the next truck stop on the main interstate, a squat building with buzzing canopy lights and the smell of frying onions clinging to the air, she found a seat at the counter and asked the night cook about Old 61. "Flooded again?" he asked, sliding her a mug of coffee. "They never fixed that low spot right. Folks kept going through even with the barricades. One guy told me he never saw him at all in the fog, swore the road was singing to him the whole way down." He chuckled softly, but the sound held respect. "They say that stretch hums a little different since they rebuilt it the first time. You hear it, you slow down. That's the deal." Renee wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Outside, beyond the bright glass and the parked rigs, the highway unspooled into the dark, quiet and unremarkable. Somewhere back there, under a blanket of fog and memory, the singing mile waited for whoever needed to hear it. On her dash, when she climbed back into her cab, the CB channel read 19. The last call logged on the tiny screen was from hours before, a different road entirely. Her father's handle did not appear anywhere in the history. As she pulled onto the interstate, the tires on the smooth concrete made their usual, featureless hiss. No hidden tunes, no patterns, just the steady song of miles ticking away under a sky that, for the moment, was clear. Story number 6. By the time Jorge crossed the state line, the world had shrunk to a corridor of gray and the circle of light inside his cab. The night had started clear enough, stars sharp over the dark ridges, but somewhere past exit 84 the fog had come down from the high slopes in slow sheets, folding itself across the highway until the mountains disappeared. Then the trees, then everything except the faint glow of the lane markers. His Freightliner pulled the grade with a patient, even rumble. The sound of the engine was oddly cushioned, as if the fog were hanging inside the cab as well as out, softening every edge. The dash lights glowed in a low, reassuring cluster. Speed steady, temperature normal, fuel comfortably above a quarter. The GPS showed a thin line winding across a field of nameless green, the little arrow straddling the border between counties with no towns marked. He took a sip from his thermos and found the coffee lukewarm, more comfort than caffeine now. The heater hummed low, blowing just enough warmth to keep the windshield from fogging on the inside. Outside, moisture beaded and slid in slow trails across the glass, glittering briefly in his headlights before vanishing into the white. The CB was mostly quiet. Every so often, someone far off muttered about weather or loads, but the signals were weak, frayed at the edges by distance and terrain. Up here in the folds of the mountains, sound seemed to forget how to travel. A green sign floated out of the fog on the right, startling in its suddenness. Ridgeford Tunnel, 12 miles. Use low beams. Watch speed. Jorge frowned, watching it slip by. He'd run this route twice a month for the last year, and no one had ever mentioned a tunnel. His mental map put a summit and a winding downgrade ahead, but no bore through rock. He checked the GPS again. No tunnel icon, no alternate path, just the same thin curve, tracing around a stylized topographical hump. The road climbed higher, curling around the unseen slope. Pines pressed close to the shoulder, their trunks just darker shadows in the gray. The visibility dropped to a narrow bubble around his hood. The sense of being suspended in nothing grew stronger. Another sign emerged, closer this time. Fog area ahead. Tunnel use recommended, 3 miles. His headlights picked up the reflective sheen of an arrow beneath, pointing straight ahead. He hadn't missed any exits. He was sure of that. Yet the text carried the bland authority of officialdom, the kind of thing that didn't bother with persuasion. Must have cut a new bore, he muttered, though there was no one to hear him. At mile marker 91, the pavement under his tires changed. The smooth hum shifted to a slightly coarser vibration, like a different batch of asphalt had been laid down. The fog thickened into something almost tactile. His low beam seemed to hit a wall and bounce back. Then, finally, the darkness ahead resolved into a shape. The mouth of the tunnel rose out of the white like a giant arch. Concrete face slick with condensation. Yellow sodium lamps lined the ceiling just inside, turning the interior into a long, dim throat stretching into the mountain. A sign barred his way at the last second. Tunnel 1.4 miles. Radio advisory active. Do not stop. Red reflectors winked along the shoulders leading inward. Jorge downshifted. The engine brake growled softly, then settled as he eased off. The sound bounced back at him as he crossed the threshold, the first droplets of mist from the tunnel mouth spitting lightly against the hood. Inside, the world grew small and focused. The fog thinned to a fine haze under the lamps, turning the air yellow and soft. The concrete walls slipped by in his periphery, seams and expansion joints ticking at a steady pace. His headlights stretched further now, but found only more tunnel, curving gently with the bore. He felt the change immediately, the absence of outside. No trees, no open sky, just man-made stone wrapping him like a shell. The engine sounded louder here, fuller, filling the space ahead. His marker lights reflected off the glossy concrete, doubling themselves along the walls. A tone chirped from the radio, high and mechanical. Then the main speakers cut out mid-song. "Attention, tunnel traffic," a voice said, calm and slightly hollow. "Maintain speed, do not stop. Fog density beyond North Portal extreme." The accent was local, the diction clipped in that way old public announcements tended to be. Jorge glanced at the display. The number on the frequency hadn't changed, but the music was gone. The voice had slipped in without asking. "Watch distance between vehicles," it went on. "If tail lights disappear, hold lane and speed. Do not brake suddenly. Do not attempt to turn around." He was alone in the bore. His mirrors showed only the tunnel's faint glow retreating behind him. No headlights, no shadows. "Copy that," he said anyway, out of habit. His own voice sounded flattened by the acoustics, swallowed almost before it finished leaving his mouth. He watched the lane markings, solid white on either side, dashed yellow at the center. They flowed under his bumper in a steady, hypnotic cadence. The odometer ticked. A half mile, 3/4, up ahead. For just a heartbeat, A pair of red points winked into existence, small and distant. They bobbed in the haze, exactly where another truck's taillights would be if he weren't alone. Jorge's fingers tightened on the wheel. He didn't accelerate, didn't slow. The taillights held their distance, neither drawing closer nor slipping away. In their brief glows between breaths of tunnel haze, he thought he could see the faint outline of a trailer, an older shape, corners more squared than modern rigs. The radio crackled soft and dry. "You still with me back there?" a voice asked. Not the announcer now. This one was conversational, carrying an easy weariness. It had the tone of someone long used to night runs. Jorge hesitated, then thumbed the CB. "Right behind you," he answered before he could talk himself out of the reply. "Good," the other voice said. "Fog's a beast on the north side tonight. Don't let her push you faster than you mean to go." The words felt like they came from the concrete itself, reverberating slightly. There was something dated about the speech, a cadence from older days on the road. "You local?" Jorge asked, eyes on those twin red lights. "Didn't know about this tunnel." A soft chuckle drifted back, warbling faintly with static. "They put it through after the winter of '98. Too many lost the line in the fog on the old crest. You hear about that pileup?" Jorge had, in the broad, sanitized way stories lived on at truck stops. A bad night, zero visibility, a chain reaction on black ice near a blind curve. No one got too graphic with it. They just shook their heads, sipped coffee, and quietly slowed a bit on similar nights. "Yeah," he said. "Heard about it." The acknowledgement was a low hum. North Portal likes to remember it when the fog's this thick. She'll try to pull you straight instead of left. You'll feel it. Ignore it. The lamps along the tunnel ceiling flickered once, all together. Not off, not on just a brief dimming, like something large had passed over the mountain outside. The red taillights ahead of him stretched, blurred into twin comets for a second, then snapped back. "You running solo?" the unseen driver asked. "Yeah," Jorge said. "Reefer. Groceries. Good. Less momentum to argue with if she tugs." A pause then, almost gently. "If the radio cuts, just count to 10 and trust the line. Don't look at the walls. Don't look in the mirror." Jorge nodded, even though no one could see him. The tunnel curved almost imperceptibly. The sensation was more in his inner ear than his eyes. The yellow hashes on the floor seemed to lean. He realized suddenly that the static under the voice had changed. It wasn't the bright digital snow of modern interference. It was grainier, softer, the kind he associated with older tapes and long-ago late-night radio. "How long you been running this road?" he asked. "Long enough," came the answer. It was warm, but there was distance in it, the way there is distance in stars. "Coming up on the mark. Feel that?" He did. A shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. The tunnel's hum deepened, the echo of his engine thickening. The yellow line on the pavement seemed to straighten, even as the wall on his left bowed inward a hair, suggesting the road actually wanted to go with it. His hands felt it before his eyes did. A faint, insistent nudge toward the right, the tiniest hint his steering wanted to relax into a straighter course than the lane allowed. "Count it," the voice said quietly. 10, 9. Jorge fixed his gaze on the dashed line on the exact center of his lane. He loosened his grip just enough to feel any pull and resisted it with a measured pressure. 8, 7. Don't look at the wall. The concrete to his left loomed, closer now. In his peripheral vision, it seemed to ripple, as if something long and dark had once scraped along it and left a shiny scar. His right hand itched to flick his eyes to the mirror, to check for any threat. 6, 5. The lamps dimmed that fractional amount again. For an instant, the red taillights ahead smeared into a single, glowing ribbon, then split once more. His own lights bounced back from some irregularity on the right wall, giving the impression of another vehicle riding uncomfortably close on that side. 4, 3. He kept the wheels steady, counting under his breath now, matching the unseen driver's rhythm. 2, 1. There you go, left now, just a kiss, nothing more. The line on the floor bent. Tiny, almost imperceptible, but there. A gentle lean left, barely enough to notice unless you were looking for it. The phantom tug in his hands argued, trying to smooth it into something straighter. Jorge guided the truck along the painted curve, almost more by trust than sight. The sensation eased. The tunnel straightened. The lamps brightened subtly, as if some pressure had lifted. "Made it," the voice said, satisfaction softening the words. "Portal's just ahead. Take it easy on the downgrade. Fog's thick, but you know it's there now." He opened his mouth to respond, but the radio hissed once, loud enough to make him flinch, then fell abruptly silent. The tail lights ahead winked out, as if someone had flipped a switch. He was alone again. The end of the tunnel appeared a moment later, a dull, distant glow swelling into a bright, hazy rectangle. Fog boiled against it from the outside, churning softly. His headlights lanced through it as he emerged, the world widening once more into a featureless white. The downgrade pulled at his rig immediately. He downshifted, letting the engine hold him back, feeling the old familiar give and take of gravity and steel. Somewhere below, unseen, a valley filled with fog waited. The road disappeared into it like a line drawn into milk. The CB crackled faintly, as if clearing its throat. Regular chatter slid back in two drivers arguing amiably about sports, someone warning about a speed trap near a town he'd already passed. At the foot of the grade, where the fog finally began to thin, a small turnout appeared on the right. A monument stood there behind a chain-link fence, a stone slab with brass letters, a carved outline of a highway winding between stylized hills. Jorge caught only a glimpse as he rolled by, but the words, "In memory of those lost," flashed in his lights. At the next truck stop, he asked the woman at the counter about Ridgeford Tunnel. She raised her eyebrows. "You went through that tonight?" When he nodded, she shook her head slowly. "Tunnel's been open 20-odd years. They blasted it after that bad winter. Some folks say you can still pick up the last chatter from that pileup if the fog's right. Old radios, old rigs, guardian angels with CB antennas maybe." He smiled, but there was something serious under it. "You believe that?" She shrugged, counting his change. "Believe in listening when someone tells you how to get down a mountain in one piece," she said. "Don't much care where the voice comes from." Later, parked and wrapped in the small familiar sounds of cooling metal and distant highway hiss, Jorge scrolled through his radio's call log. There was no record of the advisory, no unfamiliar handle, no saved snippet of that calm, worn voice. Outside, drifting along the high ridgeline, fog gathered itself for another night. In the mountain's heart, the tunnel waited, its lights humming softly, its concrete remembering. Story number 7. The coastal highway narrowed to a ribbon as it approached the bay, shouldering its way out over water that no one could see. At night, even on clear evenings, the causeway felt exposed. Tonight, with the fog rolling in from the open gulf in slow, implacable sheets, it felt like driving out onto nothing at all. Nicky's Peterbilt eased onto the first span with a familiar shudder. The change under the tires was subtle, the concrete a little smoother than the cracked blacktop behind, the hum of the road shifting pitch by half a note. Guardrails rose on either side, low and utilitarian, their damp metal catching headlights in brief ghostly glints. Beyond them, the world simply stopped. Inside the cab, it was warm and close. The air smelled faintly of coffee, diesel, and the lemony cleaner she'd wiped the dash with in the last truck stop. The instrument panel threw a soft, stable glow. Fuel at half, oil pressure good, temperature in its safe little wedge. The clock above the radio said 1:23 a.m. in steady green digits. The fog had been patchy inland, lying low in the ditches, gathering in hollows. On the approach to the bay it had thickened, then thickened again, swallowing the last of the marsh grass and scrub. Now it pressed against the windshield like a living thing, a pale, grainy wall that turned her low beams into two short cones of milk. Beyond those there was no horizon, no faint suggestion of shoreline lights, no dark line where water met sky. Just blankness. Nicky rolled her shoulders once, keeping them loose. The causeway was 5 miles end to end, low and mostly straight, a concrete knife edge between sea and sky. Most nights she could see the red and white tower beacons across the bay, the distant glow of the city, the flicker of a fishing boat or two. Tonight, she might as well have been driving in a closed world. The CB had gone idle halfway down the last stretch of highway. A little earlier, she'd listened to two guys argue amiably about barbecue joints in a town no one outside the state had heard of. Now the speaker held only a soft, restless hiss, like someone thinking about saying something and changing their mind. The stereo station gave up just as the first bridge segment began. One moment a bass line drifted through the cab. The next, static crept in, thin and persistent. She thumbed the power off. In the sudden quiet, the hum of the tires sounded almost too loud, a continuous fragile thread tying her to the idea of road. Signage appeared, hovering into being ahead of her bumper, then sliding away. Causeway. Next 5 miles. No shoulder. Fog area. Use low beams. Emergency pullout. Mile 3. She checked her speed and eased down to 45. There was no one behind her. No glow in the mirrors. No faint sweep of approaching headlights. No one ahead. The causeway belonged to her alone. A few hundred yards out, the first of the marker lights appeared. They were fixed to the railings, small square housings every 100 feet or so, facing the roadway. In clear weather, they were unremarkable. Low white LEDs that made a simple dotted line along the spans. Tonight they glowed diffuse and soft, haloed by fog, each one a hazy coin hanging in the gray. She passed them in rhythm. Glow, darkness, glow. A slow pendulum pulse on. Either side never fully distinct, always blurred at the edges by moisture. After a minute or two, she realized they weren't just white. Some of them, at intervals she couldn't immediately predict, burned a faint, washed-out blue. White, white, blue. White, blue. White, white, white. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, but her gaze sharpened. She'd been over this causeway a few times before. The lights had never been blue. The CB cracked softly as if clearing its throat. "Eastbound on the bay, how's your visibility?" a voice asked, thin but clear. It sounded close and far at once, edges blurred by the same damp air that blurred everything else. Nikki's thumb brushed the mic almost automatically. "Bit like driving in a glass of milk," she said. "I'm westbound, actually." A low chuckle came back, friendly and oddly familiar, though she couldn't have said why. "Westbound, then. Doesn't much matter once you're out here, just you and the water breathing underneath. Keep it at 45, driver. Don't outrun the lights." She glanced at the dash. 46. She let the pedal ease up a fraction, bringing the needle down to 44. White, white, blue. As she watched, the blue lights seemed to line themselves up into a pattern, not quite regular, but not random either. 2 in quick succession on the left, 1 a little farther on the right, then a gap, then 3 in almost a cluster. The fog pressed against the glass with a quiet insistence. The world outside the beams remained flat, all depth stolen. Inside, warm air from the vents brushed her wrists, smelling faintly of the sea the filters had pulled from the outside. "First time across at night?" the voice on the CB asked, conversational. "Third," Nikki answered. "First in this kind of suit, The hum on the channel shifted, an old-fashioned kind of static underneath the words. "You passed the bay tower yet?" She should have been able to see it by now. A tall, skeletal thing with a pulsing red beacon halfway up. On clear nights it rose from the water like some rusted giant. Tonight, there was only fog. "Not yet," she said. "Then you're in the stretch," the voice replied. "Listen to the rail. She'll talk to you if you let her." Nikki's laugh was softer than she meant it to be. "The rail?" Another faint chuckle, tinged with something that wasn't quite amusement. "Those blue markers, they're the old lights. Coast Guard swapped them out a decade back, but the glass remembers. Only show themselves proper when the fog's thick enough to make a world of its own." She wanted to ask what that meant, but the thought unraveled as another shape materialized in the gray. At first she thought it was her own reflection, some trick of light in the moisture, a suggestion of rail and road off to her left, ghosting along at the edge of sight. Then it sharpened, just for a second causeway, less than a lane's width away, running parallel to hers. It had no guardrails, just low concrete edges slick with invisible spray. Its marker lights burned a dim, tired yellow, not the crisp white of the LEDs. On that other road, in that other strip of fog, shapes moved, truck silhouettes, Half-seen boxy cabs, rounded fenders, old-style trailers with faded company names and fonts no one used anymore. They seemed to glide rather than drive, all at the same steady speed, lines holding in an effortless convoy that ignored the wind she could not feel and the water she could not see. Their taillights glowed faintly red through the vapor, paired points moving in time. Nikki's grip on the wheel tightened, then deliberately loosened. Her heart had not jumped so much as shifted, as if sliding to a slightly new position in her chest. Her rational mind scrambled to explain what she saw. Reflection on the fog, maybe, or some odd refraction from lights on the real causeway. Distance misjudged. Fatigue. The CB hissed once. "Don't look too hard," the voice advised, suddenly softer. "Just enough to take the hint. They don't like being stared at." In that moment she realized what had seemed familiar. There was a slight, regional drawl under the words, the same one her grandfather had had. From a part of the state people didn't leave often. And there was the phrasing. Old road talk, half ghost story, half instruction manual. "How long you been running this stretch?" she asked before she could think better of it. "Longer than I planned to," the man said. "Some nights longer than others." On the parallel causeway, one truck rode a little closer to Nikki's position, its phantom trailer almost level with her sleeper. Its cab lights were dim amber glows, cut into rectangles by vertical grill bars. Painted on its side, in letters just clearer than the fog should have allowed, was a company name, Bayline Freight. She'd seen the logo once, in an old article tacked up in a truck stop about an accident on this very crossing, back before the concrete had been widened and the rails raised. She remembered the headline without wanting to. Multi-truck collision in heavy fog, 5 dead. The photograph had shown twisted metal and still water below, perfectly calm. Her eyes flicked back to her own lane. White, white, blue. The blue markers pulsed faintly at knee height, swimming in the murk like fireflies that had lost the knack of flight. "Why are they blue?" she asked. "Color of distance," the man said, as if it were obvious. "Up ahead you got a dip in the deck. Sags a little, just enough. That's where they went over." His tone didn't sharpen on the last words. If anything, it grew softer, as if wrapping itself around something fragile. "Over?" Nikki repeated, although she knew. "Fog was thicker than this," he went on. "Rain on top of it, wind under it. Some kid in a pickup thought he could pass a rig doing 40, tapped one just enough. Metal sings in this air. One went through the rail, took 2 with him. Rest piled up behind. Water was nice and quiet. Road wasn't." The tire hum beneath her boots took on new meaning. She could feel faintly a change in grade, the promise of that barely perceptible dip. Her hands felt the wheel want to relax into a straighter line, smoothing out a subtle, necessary arc the engineers had laid in. On the ghost causeway, the phantom convoy rolled on, graceful and unbothered, headlights faint smudges in the white. "Keep it on the blues," the voice said. "They'll show you where not to look." The blue markers were spaced irregularly now, 2 on the left, then 1 on the right. They drew a faint, wavering line across the gray, like breadcrumbs laid down for those willing to see them. Nikki let her eyes move from one to the next, not staring, not counting, just noting the pattern. Left, left, right, left. Near the supposed dip, the fog thickened further, if that was possible. Her low beams bounced almost straight back. She could smell salt in the air now, strong and clean. Her steering wheel seemed to gain a mind of its own, nudging ever so gently toward the faint pull of the sagging deck. She held it with easy, deliberate pressure, trusting the feel of the lane under her tires. On the other causeway, the Bayline truck eased ahead. For a single heartbeat, its driver's side window came level with her own. The cab's interior light was on a faint, sourceless glow. Behind the glass, someone sat, profile turned forward, hands on a wheel, jaw set in a familiar line of concentration. The shape of that jaw tugged at memory. Her Uncle Louis had driven for Bayline before she was old enough to ride along. She remembered only fragments. A man in a cap smelling of diesel and dill pickles. A faded photo of a truck framed on her grandmother's wall. Black crepe pinned beside it for a year after the accident. The figure in the ghost cab did not look at her. but his hand lifted briefly from the wheel, making a small, almost absent-minded motion toward the blue marker's 2 fingers, like a teacher pointing out the next line in a book. Nikki's throat grew tight, not with fear exactly, but with a prickling awareness of how many layers the night contained. She kept her truck centered. The texture of the hum changed underfoot for 3 or 4 seconds, softer, almost hollow, as if the slab beneath had been repaired once and still remembered its brokenness. The rail on her right crowded a little closer in her peripheral vision. Then the grade settled, the hum smoothed, the pressure in her hands eased. Behind her, or perhaps beside her in a version of the night that did not intersect hers, the ghost causeway and its convoy began to slide away. The yellow markers faded, swallowed by fog so thick she could no longer tease out their shapes. Only the white and blue dots of her own rail remained, steady and quiet. "You're through the dip," the man on the radio said. "Rest is straight shot. You'll see the tower in a minute. Don't look down over the side when you do." Something in his voice suggested he spoke from experience. "Who are you?" Nikki asked, more firmly than before. "You with Coast Guard or—" Static swelled gently, like a tide coming in. For a second she thought the channel had died. Then the answer came, blurred at the edges but clear in its core. "Used to be Bay Line," he said. "Used to think fog was just weather." The CB went quiet. Ahead, the Bay Tower materialized at last, a tall lattice of steel rising out of thickness, its red beacon pulsing slowly, muted by damp air. The causeway arched minutely to pass near it, then flattened again. By the time Nikki reached the far shoreline, the fog had thinned to ragged bands scraping low over the marsh. Street lights at the western end of the causeway glowed amber and comforting, their tall poles rooted in solid land. Beyond them, the highway widened and picked up the usual scattered company of insomniac drivers, their taillights winking in orderly patterns. At the base of the bridge, on a little triangle of ground by the on-ramp, sat a stone marker. She'd never been able to read it before at speed. Tonight, curiosity pulled her foot just gently enough off the pedal. In her headlights, etched letters flared, in memory of Bayline freight drivers, lost in the fog, 1997. They keep the lights for us. She rolled past, merging onto the more familiar road. The feel of the pavement changed again, returning to the ordinary chatter of patched asphalt and painted lines. The fog, left mostly behind over the bay, trailed along the shoulders in reluctant wisps. A few miles on, at a pull-off surrounded by scrub pine and sand, she parked to stretch her legs. In the cab's quieter air, she flicked through the CB's recent history. The last recorded exchange on 19 was 2 hours old, a short conversation about fuel prices. No unknown handles, no Bayline. Later, when she mentioned the blue rail lights to another driver at a truck stop diner, he stirred sugar into his coffee and nodded, unsurprised. "Yeah, you got the full treatment," he said. "Some folks cross that thing 100 times, never see a thing but their own hood. Some nights the fog puts everybody on the same road for a while, past and present, side by side. Long as you stay on your side, you're all right." "And if you don't?" Nikki asked. He shrugged, but his eyes were serious. "Then the water remembers your name too." Back in her bunk, lulled by the distant hiss of interstate traffic and the soft ticking of cooling metal, Nikki drifted towards sleep with the image of those blue lights still floating behind her eyes, little coins of ghostly color in the fog. Somewhere far off over a strip of concrete raised just above the patient sea, the causeway stretched out into another night, its rails humming quietly to anyone willing to listen. Story number 8. The high plains didn't look like much from a map. Just a broad, pale stretch between mountain ranges, a place where interstates straightened out and miles slid past with nothing to mark them but exit numbers and the occasional grain elevator. At night, though, when the wind dropped and the air lay heavy, the plateau had its own ways of reminding people it was there. On this night, the fog came up from the low draws and shallow riverbeds in slow, patient tides. It didn't billow the way coastal fog did. It seeped. It rose ankle-high in the ditches first, then thickened, flowing over the asphalt until the highway became a narrow, gray causeway through a world of soft, shifting white. May drove through it with the steady hands of someone who had been on the road longer than some of the mile markers had stood. Her Kenworth's engine thrummed beneath her, a familiar vibration that rose through the floor and into her legs, as much a companion as any co-driver. The dash glowed in gentle greens and ambers, gauges sitting exactly where they ought to be. In the cup holder, a travel mug of coffee sent up the faint smell of something that had been hot an hour ago. Beyond the glass, the world shrank to what her low beams could touch. The centerline, a series of pale, broken stitches, rose and fell in her lights and slid away under her bumper. On either side, the fog pressed close, a shifting wall that hid everything it didn't want her to see. No farmhouses, no windbreak trees, no stars. Even the usual arterial glow of the distant interstate to the south was gone. The CB had quieted 30 minutes back. Before that, two drivers heading the other direction had talked about deer and a coming cold snap, their voices fading until they were scraps of sound in the carrier wave. Then nothing. The regular FM stations had surrendered even earlier. May had switched the stereo off rather than listen to the lonely drip of static. She checked the clock again. 2:09 a.m. It felt later. Fatigue sat at the edges of her awareness, not heavy enough to demand a stop but present, like a weight on the far side of a scale. The white line blurred slightly if she let her focus wander. She straightened in her seat, rolled one shoulder at a time. "Not much longer," she said softly. The sound swallowed at once by the cab. There was a major truck stop 40 miles ahead. Fuel, hot food, a bunk, if she decided to grab a few hours horizontal instead of curled in the sleeper. 40 miles in clear air was nothing. In this, it felt like a small campaign. The first sign came out of the fog, so suddenly she almost missed it. Rest area. Vista Ridge. 1 mile. Last facilities. Next 62 miles. The reflective letters glowed eerily in her beams before slipping past back into the white. May frowned. She knew this route. She'd run it for years, back when the kids were young, and the house payment depended on her hitting every delivery window. The state had shut down most of its small rest areas along this stretch when they'd expanded the bigger interchanges. Vista Ridge had been one of the first to go. She remembered the bulletin from the DMV. Services decommissioned, no longer maintained. There shouldn't have been a sign. The fog pressed closer. The road's hum under her tires took on a slightly different tone, a higher whisper, as if the asphalt was older here, its aggregate worn smoother by long use. The Kenworth's headlights speared ahead, catching nothing but the same short wedge of gray. Another sign emerged. Vista Ridge Rest Area. 1/2 mile. Truck parking. Picnic area. Scenic overlook. Under any other sky, the word Vista would have meant something. Up here in daylight, you could see 100 miles on a clear day. The world spread out like a patchwork quilt of fields and dry river cuts. Tonight, the idea felt almost like a joke. May glanced at the fuel gauge. She had enough to skip any stop, enough to get to the big truck plaza and then some. She thought briefly of pushing on through the fog, letting the last 40 miles slide under her wheels in one quiet run. Her eyes burned, just a little. The muscles across the back of her neck ached from holding her head at that particular, attentive angle. The soft, insulating weight of the fog made the cab feel smaller than usual, as if the rest of the world had folded in on it. "Nothing wrong with a stretch," she muttered. Walk around the rig, splash of water on the face. The exit materialized out of the gray, the arrow on the Gore sign pointing down a short, curving ramp. She clicked on her signal, the tick-tick loud in the hush of the cab, and eased onto the deceleration lane. The fog thinned for a heartbeat at the top of the ramp, letting the headlights reach a little further, then thickened again as the pavement dropped into a shallow hollow. The rest area appeared not all at once, but in pieces. First the tall poles with their sodium vapor lamps, halos of yellow light floating in the mist. Then the faint geometry of a parking lot, angled slots for cars, long back-in spaces for trucks. A low brick building with a peaked roof and wide eaves sat in the center, its windows glowing with warm light. A line of picnic shelters, their roofs dark triangles, marched off into the white toward where the overlook must be. May drove slowly past a row of trucks. They sat quiet, beads of moisture glistening on their mirrors and grills. A few idled, exhaust, pluming faintly into the damp air. Others shut down entirely, dark and self-contained. Their shapes were a mixed lot, a couple of sleek, arrow-nosed rigs like hers, an older cab, over with faded company lettering, a long-hooded Peterbilt whose chrome stacks had gone dull in the fog. She eased into an open slot alongside the older trucks and set the brake. The air system sighed, a soft release. When she killed the engine, a deeper quiet flowed in, broken only by the faint dripping of condensation somewhere along the trailer and the distant murmur of a generator. For a moment she sat without moving, hands resting on the wheel, listening to the sound of her own breath. The fog outside wrapped the windows in pearly gray. The glow from the rest area building made the mist nearest it look almost golden. Finally she grabbed her sweater from the back of the seat, shrugged into it, and climbed down from the cab. The metal step was slick but solid under her boots. The air had that high plain chill, damp without being heavy, cold without quite biting. She could taste minerals on her tongue, a faint tang like stone after rain. Her footsteps on the asphalt were muffled. The fog swallowed sound as well as sight. The nearest truck loomed up beside her. The old cab, over, its blue paint nearly gray under the sodium lights. She glanced at its door out of habit, reading the company name. Circle Star Transport, it said, in a curvy logo she hadn't seen in at least 20 years. The DOT number was lower than hers. A little placard under the window declared safety first, 1989 driver of the year. She blinked, then stepped around the front of the truck, chalking it up to an antique fleet unit someone still loved enough to keep on the road. The rest area building's glass doors opened easily under her hand. Warmth and light washed over her. Inside, the world shifted. The lobby was clean but had the slightly worn look of places that see many people pass through and few linger. The floor was a mosaic of small tiles in shades of brown and cream. A row of vending machines hummed along one wall, their fronts advertising chips and candy in designs she hadn't seen in years. Bright, blocky fonts, mascots with 1,980 seconds haircuts. A pair of payphones stood side by side near the entrance to the restrooms, their handsets hanging neatly, cords curled. A long wooden bench with a high back ran under the front windows. Above it, a tourist brochure rack displayed glossy pamphlets. Visit historic Drayton. See the Vista Ridge overlook. Family fun at Pioneer Town. She stepped closer and saw the dates on the event listings. July 1994. August 1995. Labor Day weekend 1993. A coffee station sat near the center, all stainless steel and brown plastic levers. Someone had set out a stack of thick white paper cups and a little jar of sugar packets. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee, floor wax, and something floral from a wall-mounted air freshener. "Help yourself," a voice said. May turned. The woman behind the information counter wore a state-issue vest over a pale blouse, her hair pulled back in a sensible clip. She might have been 40 or 60, the kind of face that aged by adding character rather than lines. Her name tag said, Clara, in neat black letters. "Coffee's fresh," Clara went on, "or as fresh as it gets at 2 in the morning. May hesitated only a second before reaching for a cup. The coffee came out hot and dark, steam curling gently. She wrapped her fingers around the warmth and took a cautious sip. It tasted like every rest area coffee she'd ever had. A little bitter, a little thin, entirely acceptable. "Didn't think this place was still open," May said. Her voice sounded louder than she'd expected in the hush. "I could have sworn they shut Vista Ridge down when they built that new big stop at the junction." Clara smiled, small and wry. "We don't show up for everybody," she said. "Just the ones who need us when the fog's like this." May couldn't tell if it was a joke or not. "Road's something else out there," she admitted. "Haven't seen the sky in an hour. Can't tell if I'm on a mountain or driving through a cloud." Clara's gaze flicked briefly to the windows, where the outside world had been reduced to a flat, luminous gray. "Tonight it's both," she said. "You been running long?" "Left the city about 8, May said. "Been in the seat since then, with a stop for fuel. Figure another 40 to the big plaza. Thought I'd stretch my legs so I don't drift." "Good thinking." Clara's eyes crinkled at the corners. "There's a lounge down that hall if you want to sit a spell. Chairs that tilt back. No one will bother you." May glanced past the restrooms, where a short corridor led to a side room. She could just see the edge of a soft chair, the glow of a lamp beyond. "I don't like to sleep too far from the truck," she said automatically. Clara tilted her head. "You won't be far. Road's right out there. You'll make your run. This is just a pause." Something in the way she said pause made the hair at the back of May's neck stir. Not fear, more like standing on a platform between trains. A man came out of the men's restroom then, drying his hands on a paper towel. He wore a jean jacket with a faded patch that read, "Midwest Haulers," and a trucker cap too crisp to be truly old. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes red-rimmed not with drink but with long hours. He nodded at May as he passed, then paused at the brochure rack, studying a pamphlet for the overlook. "Used to stop here with my dad," he said, half to himself. "He'd point out all the towns from up top. Told me if I stayed between the lines I'd never have to see the bottom of the ravine." "You heading east?" Clara asked him gently. "Yeah. Fog's nasty past mile 40. He crumpled the towel and stuffed it in the bin. "Figured I'd wait a bit. Hear they had a bad wreck along there a few winters back. Don't want to star in a sequel." "You won't, if you listen to your gut," Clara said. May sipped her coffee, watching. The man moved like someone used to the weight of the wheel in his hands, but there was a looseness to his shoulders here, a slackening she recognized from drivers finally off duty. He headed down the short hall toward the lounge. Curiosity tugged at her. She followed, cup warm in her hand. The lounge was a square room with 4 big chairs arranged around a low table. A television, an older model, bulky, with rounded screen edges, sat on a shelf in the corner, turned off. Floor lamps cast soft circles of light. One entire wall was glass, looking out toward the picnic area. The fog pressed. Against it, a blank canvas. 2 of the chairs were occupied. The man from the restroom had already sunk into one, his head tilted back, eyes half closed. In the opposite chair, a woman, in a flannel shirt and heavy wool socks, cradled a cup of something and stared out at the white. Her hair was braided down her back. A pair of keys dangled from a lanyard in her lax hand. "Mind if you sit?" May asked. The woman shook her head, a small, absent gesture. May settled into a chair. The upholstery hugged her in a way that made a low, traitorous part of her want to close her eyes. The steady drone of highway hum was absent here. This space had its own soundtrack. The faint tick of a clock mounted above the door. The occasional whisper of the air system. Once, distantly, the soft whoosh of the restroom's hand dryer. "How long you been on?" the woman asked quietly after a moment. May considered. "Since dusk, mostly." "You? Too long." A ghost of a smile crossed the woman's face. "Fog makes it feel like more." They sat in companionable silence. The fog pressed against the glass, patterns forming and dissolving as low currents shifted it. For a heartbeat, May thought she could see pinpricks of light in it, red and white, flashing, distant, not reflections from the rest area parking lot, but something farther away, along a line she couldn't quite trace from here. "Did you see that?" she asked. The woman nodded slowly. "Lights along the grade," she said. "They've been going back and forth for a while now." "Emergency?" May asked. "Maybe. Maybe just what happened already. Playing over." The woman's tone wasn't flippant, but it carried the calm of someone who'd long since accepted that some things simply were. "Clara says when it's thick like this, all the rough nights stack on top of each other out there. Time gets deep." May thought of the silent, outdated brochures, the old logos on the vending machines, the circle star cab over outside, its paint trapped somewhere between decades. She thought of all the stories told over coffee about fog and missed exits, and the one that shook me up enough to quit running nights. "You a regular here?" she asked. "Only when it's bad." The woman's smile held a trace of something like fondness. "When it's clear, I go right past without seeing the signs at all. Most times, it's just a patch of scrub and an old closed ramp. But then there are nights like this." She tipped her head toward the fog beyond the glass. "And there's room for a few more chairs." May's cup had gone half empty without her noticing. The warmth soaked into her hands, her chest. The weariness that had hovered at the edge of her awareness settled in more firmly, but it wasn't a dangerous, bone-deep exhaustion. It felt housed, contained. "How do you know when it's time to go?" she asked. "You'll feel it." The woman set her own empty cup down. "Fog will let go a little. Clara will probably say something about the road clearing, and you'll think of where you're headed again." As if summoned, Clara appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, drying her hands on a dish towel. "They've cleared the tangle by mile 38, she said. "Tow crews are headed back. Wind's picking up a little. You'll have patchy spots still, but you'll see your stars again." May blinked. "Tangle?" Clara's eyes softened. Couple of four-wheelers and a livestock hauler decided they all wanted the same piece of road right about the time you took the ramp, she said. "Everybody'll walk away, but they'll be talking about it for a bit." She tilted her head. "You weren't meant to be in that conversation." A chill moved along May's arms, under the skin, fine as pins. She looked back at the fog pressing against the glass. For an instant, she saw it differently, not as an amorphous wall, but as a curtain between stages. On one side, the familiar set, highway, ditch, fence. On the other, another play entirely, already in progress, best watched from a safe distance if watched at all. "How long was I sitting here?" she asked. Clara glanced up at the clock. 2:27, its hand said, their slow sweep unhurried. "Long enough," she replied. "Not as long as it felt. That's the way of this place." May rose, joints complaining pleasantly. The man from the restroom was fully asleep now, mouth slightly open, hands slack. The woman in flannel had closed her eyes too, but her grip on her keys hadn't slackened. "You'll wake them?" May asked quietly. "When it's their turn," Clara said. The walk back to her truck felt shorter than the walk in had. The fog was still thick, but it had pulled back from the lamps a little, leaving clearer halos around them. The trucks in the lot sat as before. The Circle Star cab over's paint looked a shade bluer now in the clearer light, its chrome catching her reflection as she passed. In her cab, the familiar smells welcomed her. The trace of old coffee, the faint hint of pine from an air freshener clipped to the vent. She slid into the seat, set her cup in its holder, and woke the engine. It turned over on the first try, rumbling into a comforting idle. Her dashboard clock read 3:11. She frowned at it, then checked the time on her phone. 3:11 there, too. Longer than the 20 minutes she would have guessed. She had the distinct sense, though, that no time had been wasted. Easing back down the ramp to the highway, she glanced in the mirror. The rest area's lights glowed softly behind her, floating islands in the mist. The low brick building's windows shone warm. For a moment, she thought she saw someone standing at the glass, a small figure in a vest, watching. Then the fog folded over the view like careful hands. Back on the main line, the difference was immediate. The fog still lay in patches, but it came now in bands, with gaps between where the sky reappeared in ragged slices. Stars winked through, cold and clear. The road ahead seemed to stretch further in her lights. The sense of pressure lessened. The CB crackled to life. "Eastbound, you see that mess back there?" a voice asked, breathless with lingering adrenaline. "Looked like a yard sale on blacktop. Glad I caught the slowdown notice." "Yeah, 3 cars and a cattle wagon," another voice answered. "Could have been worse. Surprised nobody piled up behind them. Fog's mean tonight." May listened, piecing their half-comments into a vague picture. Brake lights blossoming too late, horns, the metallic complaints of steel kissing steel at low but inconvenient speeds. She imagined her own truck in that scenario, her attention dulled just enough by fatigue to add her bulk to the equation. "Anybody hurt bad?" someone else asked. "Nah, just some bruised egos and a few beefs on walkabout in the ditch," the first voice said. "Still, if you're coming through that stretch, keep your distance. Fog's got a memory, feels like. May's hand brushed the wheel in a small, unconscious gesture. 10, 4, she murmured, though she hadn't keyed the mic. Already did. By the time she reached mile 38, the remnants of the incident were visible only as damp streaks on the pavement where flares had burned and tires had skidded. The fog hung in tatters above the road, reluctant to move on but no longer committed. She drove through the place with the calm of someone stepping past a story they'd once been close to but were no longer part of. An hour later, under the bright, chaotic lights of the big truck plaza at the junction, she fueled up and went inside. The bustle there, voices, clatter of dishes, flat-screen TVs, flashing weather maps made the memory of Vista Ridge feel like something secret she carried alone. On her way back out, on a whim, she stopped at the rack of free highway maps by the door. She unfolded the one for this stretch and traced the path of the interstate with her finger. Between mile 34 and 40, where she knew the rest area sat, the tiny restroom icon and picnic table symbol were absent. In their place, a small gray note in the legend read, "Vista Ridge Rest Area, closed." She folded the map slowly. In her sweater pocket, her fingers brushed paper. She pulled it free. A trifold brochure, glossy, the ink slightly faded. On the front, a photograph of a wide valley under a clear blue sky, taken from a wooden fenced overlook. The caption read, "See tomorrow's route from Vista Ridge today." Inside, the printed calendar of events ended with September 1995. On the back, in small letters, it said, "When the fog comes in, pull over and rest a while. The road will still be there when you're ready." She stood for a moment beside her truck, brochure in hand, the sounds of the plaza washing around her. Idling engines, laughter, the distant hiss of tires on wet pavement. Overhead, the sky was open, a few scattered clouds drifting indifferent to the miles below. Out on the high plateau behind her, hidden now by distance and the ordinary clutter of travel, a low brick building sat in a hollow of fog. Inside, chairs waited, coffee warmed slowly on its plate, and a woman in a state vest kept an eye on the door, listening for the sound of another rig choosing, at the last moment, to take the exit that didn't always appear. May slid the brochure into the logbook pocket on her door, started her engine, and pulled back onto the highway. The white lines reached out ahead, solid and sure. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, dawn was thinking about beginning.